Warning: this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Give us 1 hour and we'll help you change the way you think about happiness. Harvesting Happiness with Lisa Cypers Kamen is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Each week, Lisa spotlights diverse trendsetters and change agents who are the greatest contemporary thinkers and doers, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. Your host, Lisa Cypers Kamen, is a widely recognized applied positive psychology expert, author, documentary filmmaker, and lecturer specializing in optimal lifestyle management. Let's get to it. Here's Lisa.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us on today's show, where you will learn how to rise up, reaching for resilience in challenging times. My first guest is Scott Hamilton. Scott, welcome to the show. I want to talk with you.
Thank you.
About what it means to show up, what it means.
Well, I mean, there's two different ways of occupying space, right? There's one way is to just sort of sit there. And the other is to really, truly like embrace every aspect of that moment. And so, I kind of figured that out in my skating life. If I'm on time and if I'm occupying the ice for the hour that I'm on the ice, that's okay, a win in one regard. But I learned pretty quickly and through a lot of failure that if I'm not really truly embracing that hour as an opportunity to grow and to improve my skills and to kind of like take it to the next level, then it's sort of a wasted hour. And when I made the decision to kind of go all in, everything changed. I mean, results started getting better. I started being more consistent. I was happier day to day in my skating, and people noticed, and so I look at so much of how we can learn from one aspect of something and translate it to another. And I just feel during these crazy times that we're living through that now people need to kind of like, stop, just turn off all the noise just for a minute and just like invest themselves in themselves. And so when the Live Your Days platform was created, it was actually 4 years ago. And I just come from the Cleveland Clinic where they diagnosed me with my third brain tumor. And they were telling me all the things that they wanted to do, a treatment or surgery, or hear the options. And I wasn't really hearing a word they were saying. I was kind of my mind, all I kept hearing was this infinite loop of like, get strong, get strong, get strong. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know if it meant physically, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually. And so I go, you know what? I think I'm all the above. I'm just going to try to because, when your life is threatened and your back's up against the wall, you can either collapse or you can come out swinging, right? So I just felt like, now is a good time to come out swinging. So they go, what do you want to do? And I said, I'm going to go get strong. That's what I'm going to do. And they're like, and let's keep an eye on this thing. And because by the third recurrence, it was like, or the second recurrence, I guess, the third brain tumor, it was like the devil I know now. And I really didn't feel symptomatic. And so I just wanted to keep an eye on it. And then when the time came, I'd pull the trigger on a treatment option. But in the meantime, I was going to just lock and load and get ready for the battle. And that was just getting physically strong, dropping the weight I wanted to, getting, more muscle mass. It was, really pouring into my emotional health. And a lot of that came through my spiritual health, and then just be interested in the process, get to know everything I needed to know about, my condition, and also just really just be interested in what's going on in the world, and just sort of stepping out of my bubble and just sort of like engaging. And it was remarkable that in just that decision of really investing in myself, the tumor would shrink and grow and shrink and grow. And it kind of has been vacillating, and it's been sort of a miraculous journey. And so when they detected the tumor 4 years ago, I was working with a company called 5x5 Agency. They're an amazing marketing group. And they took an interview that I did with people.com, and they extracted what I said. Like, man, we got to just live our days. Because in that I said that our bodies are incredibly fragile and vulnerable to a lot of things, but they're also phenomenally resilient, but ultimately temporary.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. This is the vessel. That's it.
I mean, and then so we got to let's just take this experience and try to get everything we possibly can out of it. And so they said, well, let's do it. And I go, no, it's not. It doesn't feel like the right time. There was just something in my spirit that just said, no, this isn't your message right now. And I thought, okay. And I try to always listen to that inner voice, that inner spirit. And so second month of COVID in April, everything's locked down. People are afraid to go to the grocery store. Everybody's just in fear. And they reached out and they said, now.
Yes.
And I just said, you know what? Now is really important. And so we saw those, that 2 weeks to flatten the curve turn into now it's like 9 months. And we don't see really any end in sight. Whatever the next normal is it hasn't really presented itself to, as far as I know. So it's sort of like one of these things where it's really great to just take ownership of our lives and our experience and move forward in joy and in confidence.
Scott, some people would say you're Mr. Positive. You're the Mr. They call me Pollyanna, so maybe they would call you Polly-Adam. I don't know, but you have a track record of through all that you have done, whether it is your skating career, your bout with cancer, the brain tumors, broadcast career. It's all based upon positive. And some people would say, well, I just don't have it in me. And I think one of the things the Live Your Days campaign does, and certainly all the other luminaries that you interview and will be interviewing, really teach us that we can cultivate this.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, hey, you catch me on a day and it's like I'm the most beaten down person you could possibly imagine. But I'm really building those muscles. And it's that showing up thing. It's like I'm building the muscle I need to build in order to rise up above whatever my current situation is. And that's kind of who we are as people. We do have the power. We do have the authority. We do have all of this incredible strength to tap into if we just recognize that, and there'll be times, it's like, oh man, today's the day. And it's just like, I'm struggling with this and I'm really having a hard time with that. And this didn't go the way I wanted it to. And it's like, doggone it, I'm about to lose my temper. And that's so unusual for me, and it's just like, no, take a step back, breathe, and you'll get through it, and so it's that. So we just got to just take stock of our circumstance and then take control of it. And it's really a muscle. It really is building a muscle in your being that just allows you to kind of go, okay, I could choose to go left or right or down or up. And I really want to go up. I really want to do everything I can in order to live this day productively and joyfully.
And when we talk about, mental muscle tone or emotional fitness, if we approach our lives as we would train for a skating competition or train for a marathon or train for, whether it's even releasing a little bit of weight because we want to be a little bit more fit. Each day we've got that freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable, right? I mean, it's the two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. It's funny. I did a TED Talk. I'm like the dumbest guy to ever do 2 TED Talks. And the second TED Talk, I was at a thing in Nashville. It's all about country music. So I was at the BMI honors thing dinner. I was there because a friend of mine was being recognized that night. And I thought, oh, that's really, it'd be fun to go to this thing. And I was inside and just sort of, doing what most people were doing at the time, this staring at all the luminaries in the room and just being, in awe of all the talent. And I was standing next to this guy and he goes, hey, I run the TEDx in Nashville. Would you do a talk for us? I go, sure. And he goes, okay, we'll be in touch. And so I said, what do you want me to talk about? And he goes, I don't care. It's like, oh, well, I mean, I thought there might be a reason you invited me to do this. And he goes, I really don't care. And I thought, well, all right. Okay. So the only thing, and again, it's that inner voice, that kind of that inner spirit said, you need to talk about suffering. And it's like, oh man, that's a big fat downer. I don't want to do that. And it's like, I couldn't think of anything else. So I went on the TED site and I said, suffering. Who's talked about suffering? Nobody had ever talked about the one thing that we all have in common.
Yeah.
The one thing we will all experience, and that is suffering. And so I decided I needed to address it. So I came at it from many different angles and from my own experience. And it was remarkable that I came to the end and I said, look, the way I see it, like when we get to these difficult times, it's like we're at a fork in the road, right? And in my experience, we have three ways of handling that fork in the road. But the fork in the road isn't a left or right fork in the road. And I took my two fingers and I held them out like parallel with the floor. And then I raised my right index finger and I lowered my left middle finger so that you can see the road one was up and one was down. And I said, this is our choice. We can succumb to whatever our condition is right now. Just let it run its course. Let it defeat us. Let it, just destroy us. We could stay at the fork and not move and just adapt. That's a choice. Or we could just, really just start digging deep and climbing that higher road that will allow us to evolve into who we are legitimately supposed to be. So the succumb, adapt, evolve thing has been something that I really looked at it, and again, it's almost daily that something comes into my world or my space that is trying everything it can to bring me down or to make me question things. Or, I'm a married man with 4 kids. If that isn't stress, I don't know what is.
Though that requires succumb, adapt, or evolve.
Oh man, I got to evolve. Kids deserve it, right? But it's like that. It's like, it's my wife and I. We have different backgrounds. We have, we love each other. Everything, it's like solid. But we do come at things from our own personal experiences. My parents were school teachers, and so it was kind of like one approach, and her parents, were, from the South, and everything was very, genteel, and they're wonderful, wonderful people. So it's just sort of coming to that idea that it's, every marriage is a pure mixture of commitment and compromise, and hopefully, thank goodness for me, forgiveness. It's just like,
yeah.
But it's that. It's like, how do we handle this the best way we can handle it? And like every time my teenage son gets in his car, I go, think of the best decision you can make at any given moment and make that one. Okay.
Yeah. Where's to start with where you are.
Yeah. And so it's all of that. I mean, there's so many radically chaotic things going on in our world, especially right now. And we just have to be comfortable in our identity and what we have to offer, and especially to ourselves. It's not being selfish to shore ourselves up. When you're on an airplane, they tell you to put the mask on your face before you do that of a child, because if you're no good, they're no good. And it's kind of that way as we interact with our community. It's like, if we're no good, we don't have anything to share that will feed and really grow and impact our communities in a positive way. So, I just really I'm constantly working on it. I read, I listen, I try to pay attention to what's going on. And sometimes, I do succumb a little bit to all the negativity and I get frustrated and and then I'm able to rise above it. But, this whole kind of live your days concept this is one of your days.
Yeah.
This is one of them.
One of your most precious days. Could be the most precious day of all.
If you allow it to be.
Yeah.
Right? And it starts with that choice of, I'm going to do this today, right?
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to continue the conversation with Scott Hamilton. We're talking about Live Your Days campaign. To learn more about Scott's work over with Live Your Days, please visit liveyourdays.com. On Twitter @Live Your Days, on Facebook, Live Your Days Official, and on Instagram @Live Your Days. We'll be right back. And when we come back, Scott, I want to talk with you about your podcast and some of the cool people that you've been talking with.
Oh, man.
We'll be right back. Before we pause, I want to remind everyone about the impermanence of all things, both good and bad. At the beginning of the pandemic, it felt like we'd be in for a brief rough patch, and then life would return to normal. But now, the new normal is quarantine life, social distancing, online learning, and missing people we love around the world. And sometimes I too feel overwhelmed by everything on my plate. Work, caretaking a family elder, my kids, maintaining a healthy routine, concern for parents and siblings who have gotten sick, and staying on track to meet my professional goals. It's a lot to handle. Taking care of our mental health should not be a luxury, but a self-care necessity. And that's why I'm proud to be partnered with Talkspace Online Therapy and also a client. Therapy can really help shift your perspective, teach new tools to cope in difficult times, and be a guiding light in the stormy seas of life. I wholeheartedly recommend Talkspace. You can sign up online and start therapy on the same day. Depending on the plan you choose, you can text, video, or send voice messages to your licensed therapist. Best of all, Talkspace is a fraction of the cost and more convenient than in-person therapy. It's like having your own on-call mental health angel. And Talkspace has thousands of licensed therapists trained in more than 40 specialties, including anxiety, depression, substance abuse, trauma, anger management, relationship issues, food and eating, and so much more. Talkspace is a secure and private HIPAA-compliant interactive platform that uses the latest end-to-end bank-grade encrypted technology, providing a safe virtual space to talk it out with your therapist from the comfort and privacy wherever you are, whenever, and for whatever is on your mind. My therapist gave me practical guidance that really changed my life for the better. I'm so glad that I found Talkspace and got the support that I need, and you can too. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $100 off your first month with Talkspace. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com or download the app. Make sure to use the code HAPPINESS to get $100 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's happiness and Talkspace.com. Now let's take that pause. We'll be right back.
To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com and explore Lisa's experiential on-site brain fitness workshops, corporate programming, and speaking engagement services.
And we are back. If you're just joining us now, we're talking about what it means to rise up, reaching for resilience in challenging times. Let's get back to the conversation with my guest, Scott Hamilton. Scott, you have a podcast now, which is super cool. You have done a 9-part series, which may expand as a result of all the great work you're doing. Talk a little bit about the cool people who are showing up.
Oh man, it's been such a blast. It's just, we were informing, kind of the whole idea. We just said, we want to come up with, sort of like live your day, sort of the carpe diem of today. It's like when you get up first thing, it's live your day, live your day. And so I thought, well, I got a lot of really fun people that I've been around that, have really cool stories to share. So I think instead of just people looking at my, bald head, my aging face, it would be fun to kind of bring in people to talk about their lives and how they built it and how they've come, risen above, any of their, struggles or challenges. And so we put together a list of 8 people and I think each of them, many of them will be familiar. A couple of them may not be, but they all have something to say, and they kind of go on those 4 qualities I tell you, about physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual. It's like, that's the foundation of our lives, right? And it's like, if you're sitting in a chair and those were the 4 legs of the chair, physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and any of those legs were missing, how's that going to work out? It's like probably going to fall down. So we really wanted to talk to people to kind of bring people in and allow them to be entertained and enlightened. And our the first podcast release was mine, which was basically to set up the platform. And then the first guest we had was Robin Roberts, and I was blown away. I did my research and, as we do, and her dad was a Tuskegee Airman, which I didn't know. I didn't know that she was a Hall of Fame basketball player. Her dream was to go to Wimbledon, but she knew she was, that wasn't going to be her sport. So she got into basketball, and she was one of the only women ever in her conference to get 1,000 points and 1,000 rebounds in the same season. And she was just dominant. But
dang.
She loved sports. And so she, and her storytelling of even, she got into like media, and she started very low and she worked her way up. And then ESPN called and she turned them down because she knew she wasn't ready. I mean, it's like, what? And so, it's like her, and it's like Christy Yamaguchi, born with, deformity in her legs and feet. And she becomes an Olympic figure skating champion. Kevin Nealon dropped today. That's the one that's being done. It's out as of today. And he talks about, being ready for the moment. He desperately wanted to be a stand-up comic, but he didn't know anything about it. So he went to work as a bartender at the Improv in LA, but he didn't know how to bartend either. So, it's just about, really preparing yourself to be ready for when opportunity happens. Bart Millard of Mercy Me, broken family, abused as a child, he's always considered his father to be a monster. And through faith and cancer, his father was redeemed. And he said that the man he feared and hated the most was the man he wanted to become and who became his best friend. And the story of redemption is just so powerful in his faith. And, Miles Adcox from Onsite, it's a mental health place where he said people deserve to have a PhD in themselves. It's like, and yes, we deserve it. We deserve to feel good about ourselves. And so talking to him and just his platform and how he's grown it. And, it's just been, Marcus Whitney, who I could be like a stalker fan of this guy. He's an entrepreneur in the health in Nashville, and he's a part owner in the Nashville SC soccer team, but he's an entrepreneur. And his journey of how he had to figure it out was just remarkable. And it's inspiring for anyone that is in a position of failure that wants to rise above their conditions. So we talk to people that really have something to say in a really fun, entertaining, but also powerful way. And it's just been remarkable. I talked to one that's coming up soon is Vern Lundquist, and he just celebrated his 80th birthday, and he captained some of the most memorable events ever on television, of just being the play-by-play guy and just his life and how he built it. And it really has been a wonderful adventure, and I really hope it continues. And, I guess it depends on how it takes root. But one of the ways that we've built this thing in order to be really impactful is there's, as part of this, there's a 30-day challenge. If you go to liveyourdays.com, you can sign up for the 30-day challenge. So for 30 days, starts at day one. Whenever you sign up, that's your day one. You'll get an email that just gives you something to think about that day and a minor task. And the task is meant to build gratitude and just sort of a perspective of, wow, I really am in control of this day. And I did a 30-day challenge. It was really fun. We never ask anybody to run a marathon or, slay a dragon or anything some dragons are small. They're more like tiny little lizards, but that wouldn't be fun either. But it's, it's one of those things where, every day you just get reminded of a certain aspect of your life that you can just do this one small task. And it's there to remind you that you're in control and that you have the power to take ownership of today and make it really special.
And I also think hearing the stories of others, everybody loves a good story. We love a heroic story. And one of the things that we can realize through your work and these interviews, it reminds us that we have the choice to be the hero of our own lives.
Yep, that's exactly it. And, I go back to, there's been an estimated 100 billion people born to this planet, since day one of humanity. And you think about it, you take a step back and you go, that's a lot of people. And then you go, well, I'm the only one of me ever.
Right.
And I'm the only one that has these particular unique set of qualities, and I'm the only one that has this voice, and I'm the only one that can do whatever I'm meant to do. And part of the fun is figuring that out. It's like, when I wrote Finish First a few years ago, it was about, understand who you are. It's like purpose. What is my purpose? And it's like, even if I dreamed and I knew and I just felt in my heart that my purpose was to be in the NBA, it's not going to be on the floor. It's like, I'm 5'4", but then I take a step back and I go, but here's what I'm naturally drawn to. And honestly, Michael Jordan will never do a backflip on ice skates. So
true that.
Ever. Yeah. So I go, and so there's power in that. And I go, well, like I met a little girl, and when I went to Finish First was coming out about the time of Pyeongchang Olympics. In fact, it came out while I was at the Olympics, and the venue manager there is a guy named Josh Lee. We became fast and forever friends. And he said, "Can you talk to my staff?" And I go, "Sure. Why?" And he said, "Well, I find culturally we're struggling with identity, and in South Korea, we're sort of meant to be obedient. Just do this, serve, the greater master or whatever." And he goes, "I just feel a lot of our kids are just without identity, and I'd love for them to hear this perspective." And so I gave my speech, and at the end, a little girl came up to me and she looked annoyed, and I go, "Yeah." And she said, "Can I ask you a question?" And I go, "Anything." And she said, "I don't understand what you mean about purpose." And I go, "Well, purpose is sort of a unique, set of qualities that we have that, lends itself to a specific identity." And she goes, "I'm not good at anything." And I could hear when she said it that she's been told that 1,000 times. So I just said, well, let's break it down. What brings you joy? What do you like to do? If you could spend just a day doing one thing, what would it be? And she said, "I like to read." And I go, "Oh, what kind of books do you read?" And she said, "Well, my last 2 books were Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights." And I go, "Oh, you love the classics."
One of those.
And this big smile came across her face. And I don't know, I think it was the Holy Spirit just shoved this into my mouth, and it said, "Maybe you're an author." And her eyes did that little pop thing of recognition. It was like, and I could just see inside of her brain that all of a sudden all these synapses were firing that had never fired before. Like, wait a minute, I could do that. And it was like, are you kidding me? I'm the first person that ever gave this girl permission to dream. That is so wrong. That's just like, she should have had that, 16 years ago, and so I saw the power in that moment of, well, maybe you're this. And it was like, maybe I am. And a lot of people just, are, they're defeated, that's like, well, you're no good at this and you're never any good at that. And you're just this and you're not that. And it's like, well, you're allowing all these outside forces to kind of allow, their opinions to be thrust on you. And I really feel strongly that if we just take a step back and we say, what am I good at? What do I like to do? What am I drawn to? Then you can, sort of allow the naysayers and all the, opinions that are, being thrust on you, just take its own identity and, on the bench, right? Just go ride the pine there for a little bit, because I'm in the game here, and
yeah, in the game. And I think that's what this is really all about, live your days and how we show up and fully occupy our lives is remaining in the game. And I think you said something really important about permission to have our dreams. Like, nobody can ever strip us of that, no matter what kind of society we live in. That is uniquely ours, and no one can take that away from us.
Well, they'll try, though.
No, they'll try. Oh, yes, I understand. But you know what? But the ultimate freedom is in our hearts and minds.
Yep.
You gotta go. I gotta go. And thank you for coming to my happy place, or me coming to yours today. This has been great. To learn more about Scott's work with the Live Your Days campaign and his podcast, please go to liveyourdays.com, on Twitter at Live Your Days, Facebook is at Live Your Days Official, and on Instagram, that is at Live Your Days. Scott, thank you again. Come hang out anytime.
Oh, you're the best. I love harvesting happiness. I think that's the greatest thing in the world.
We're going to take a quick pause and then we'll be back to continue the conversation.
Did you know that happiness is actually good for your health? Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect with us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and follow Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for a daily dose of inspiration.
Welcome back. We're continuing the conversation about what it takes to rise up, reaching for resilience in challenging times. My next guest is Sebastian Matthews. My guest today, Sebastian Matthews, is a poet and a writer living in Asheville, North Carolina with his wife and son. He teaches at several colleges and universities. He's the author of a memoir, 2 award-winning poetry books, and 1 novel. We're talking about Beyond Repair, living in a fractured state. What happens when we are triggered by a trigger? And Sebastian, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today on Harvesting Happiness.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you. We often talk about the dark side on a happiness podcast. And really the focus is, how do we make meaning? How do we bounce back from life's difficulties? And your book, Beyond Repair, Living in a Fractured State, chronicles a 4-year journey from 2014 through 2018 about your recovery and healing from a major automobile accident. I'd love for you to kind of set the stage for us and give us a bit of the backstory.
You bet. The accident happened in 2011. It was a head-on collision that my family just kind of literally unluckily ran into. A man had a heart attack and swerved into our lane. We were both going about 50 miles an hour. So it was a very devastating accident. We took a long time to recover. And when we did, it's 1 year out, you're physically essentially recovered. 2 years out, you're feeling a little better. PTSD comes along. So, I think people who've gone through trauma understand that it comes in waves. And so after about 3.5 years, I felt like, okay, I can move out into the world again. But I found that I was triggered a lot through PTSD around driving, around encounters with people. And I felt like I needed to try to make encounters the central part of my life. As a writer, I wanted to see if I could connect. And what I found were people around me. Not only was the world around me different, but I felt like a lot of people seemed to be triggered as well, and that maybe the whole culture was in a PTSD state.
And I think that's very relevant to the period of time that we're living in. It reflects our collective story, on a macro level, as well as your story on a micro level. And what did you discover about yourself and humanity through this journey?
That's a great question. And just what you just said, it's funny to be talking about this book now through the lens of having gone through as a society, the pandemic. And it really does seem extra relevant, but also as if some ways the world I was living in over just 2 years ago is so different than now. And so things are moving fast. But for me, what I learned, and maybe it goes back to this idea of happiness or maybe contentment, was I think there were a lot of parts of my life that I wasn't really happy in, or I was struggling around the time of the accident. And the accident knocked me off a trajectory, a course, and forced me to deal with a lot of things that I maybe wouldn't have dealt with otherwise. And so coming out of it as a closer-knit family with a deeper sense of community and connection, because all these people had helped us and our community was so essential to our recovery, I felt like I had a second chance, a chance to really focus in on my child, who was 8 at the time, is now 17, marriage, less teaching, more writing. And so I really felt lucky. And I felt like, what I learned from it was you got to move through pain, you got to move through challenge, and you have to be tough and persevere and ask for help.
So what I'm hearing is that the resiliency is what came to the fore for you, that life was actually pretty good before the accident, but the accident really forced you to reflect and prioritize and maybe really tap into the more emotional side, the software of your humanness.
I like that phrase. I think you're right. I'm by nature as a writer, and here's who I am. I'm pretty contemplative and a processor, but this was maybe a different level or a different frequency. I think that happens when you get when you face death or when you face a real big challenge. And so, yeah, there's kind of a silver lining to the experience. Does that answer your question?
It does. And as we're speaking, or as you're talking, I'm also thinking about the difference between men and women and our approaches to dealing with adversity. That typically men are very, very pragmatic in wanting to solve the problem. Women approach that problem solving a different way through the feeling aspects of their character. But it sounds like for you, because you were a contemplative sort of man prior to this, that it allowed you to even go more deeply to get in touch with that side of yourself.
It did, so maybe a little bit of both. There's the side of me that after the accident, I rushed to get off the pain meds. I rushed to get back on my feet. I had broken both feet and legs. I rushed to get back in the car to drive because I wanted to be there for my son and to be there for my wife, who was going to have to take a longer time. And so that was maybe that kind of, I wouldn't say macho, but that the urge to be practical, to take control. And what happened was 2 years later, after the accident, my wife really had come back in a lot of ways, emotionally, physically. And she turned to me and said, "You got to stop. You got to go to therapy. You're a wreck." And I realized that I had done what I had done at the cost of maybe my emotional life. And so I had to back up and do some work that maybe you're talking about that might come more naturally to women. Yeah,
but it sounds like the work came through the book, that the book itself was also a therapeutic process in contribution to the healing. That maybe you went for therapy. Yes, you reached out to your community, but the inner work also comes from the expression of the story.
So true, but I'll break it into two parts. The first book that I wrote, Beginner's Guide to a Head-On Collision, really was healing. But I wrote it in the process of the recovery, and it helped bring me back. The second book, though very much what you said, but maybe a little less so than the first, because I began to get more into my mode of a writer or a reporter. I began to see it as a project, and when I began to connect it to the culture around me, that we're 2 years into last 2 years of Obama, the first 2 years of Trump, lots of divisiveness, lots of disconnect on many levels, all the racial stuff going on, and it was just like, whoa, this is a different world. This is a hyped up world. This is different than what I knew. So I began to kind of wanting to document something culturally through the personal. That personal is political. Always rings true for me.
And we were talking prior to the beginning of the interview about being triggered in a triggered world, that some of your observations as you moved through the recovery process realized just how triggered the world in which we live is right now.
Very much so. I'll tell you a quick little story that starts the book. I had been walking around my neighborhood, a kind of suburban neighborhood, a lot of trees, a lot of hills, and getting myself back to being able to walk. And I had a dog, and it was hard for me to do it. And oftentimes I'd be interacting with the people driving through. And I found that for a while that there was always these men, white men in particular, always, in white trucks often, kind of being jerks. Or maybe I was triggered and I was making them get mad. Who knows? But I was having these really hostile interactions. And after a day of like 3 of them, I was done. And this guy came up to me at the end of the night. It was the last walk of the day, because I write and walk, and it's kind of how I do my creative life. He opened his window, and I was like, "What do you want?" I was ready to kind of fight. And he was like, "Oh, what's your dog's name? I love your dog. My dog just died." He was just the sweetest guy. And it was like, I was the one who was the jerk. I was the one stereotyping him. So there's sometimes it's a class thing, sometimes it's a race thing, so many ways that we can misconnect. And so when I saw that and saw myself, I thought, okay, this is something to explore, because I can't tell the difference from my triggers or what's just going on in the world around me.
Oh, I think that is a very important point, the separation of triggers and the blur. I mean, you live in a state that is probably very mixed, or would you say it leans towards conservative in your state, not your town?
Oh, state, it's one of the 5-6 years ago it leaned blue. It's more conservative now. I think Buncombe County that is a really conservative county. Asheville's a very progressive city on the whole.
Yes.
So it's definitely a mix. It's a mix.
And so here you are living in a sort of more liberal or progressive state, and then you're seeing all of the tension, or things are changing and percolating, and then realizing that you had a judgment against the white truck men, white men in white trucks, only to realize that last one that could have been the straw that broke the camel's back was just some guy acknowledging the loveliness of your dog.
And his sadness for losing his.
Yeah.
That was the real. And, there's this idea of microaggressions. The Claudia Rankine's book, Citizen, was a very important book because it's looking at microaggressions that African Americans face often, with white people. And I find that it often, that not only are they often aggressions sometimes, or sometimes confusions and awkwardnesses and misreads, and that it often goes a lot of different directions, so to speak, white on white. You can misread for class reasons, culture, all these reasons. And I think we need to look at them very carefully right now, because we are so on a hair trigger that I think we're ready to misunderstand each other, immediately.
But
yeah.
No, I was going to say what was so profound was this interaction with this man about his dog. And at the end of the day, that his suffering or his desires or his pleasures were not any different than yours or ours,
Yeah, common humanity.
Yeah.
The other event that happened early was on the other end of the spectrum. When you have to recover from a major wreck or cancer, you get self-involved by necessity, and you get wrapped up in yourself, and pain wraps you in yourself. And early on, I was walking around downtown for the first time, and I was coming into a building, and I was about to enter into I was exiting a elevator, and an older woman was entering, and as she was trying to touch the which floor to go to, the doors were closing. She looked at me and said, "Where am I?" And I just immediately opened stopped the door and said, "What are you looking for?" And we started talking, and it turned out she had Alzheimer's, and I helped her find where she was going, and she would have been walking out into the middle of a busy street and away from her husband. And I was barely able to get out of myself to notice she was in trouble, but I did. And I was, a good citizen, and I played my role, but I was like, that also made me think, okay, man, you're going to miss a lot if you're so wrapped up in yourself. Wake up, And so that was part of the project mode is, okay, I'm a writer. I can do that. I can begin to explore. And as I began to travel more back as in my writing life, I began to expand and try to push myself into situations that maybe I wouldn't have normally entered. But that took a while, because at first it was just out the door, 2 feet.
We're going to take a break in a moment, but before we do, I wanted to ask you about the return to the classroom. Did you return to teaching through this period?
I returned too early. That was another thing I did. I thought I needed to make money, and I needed to finish the semester. These were things I thought. And I went back a couple months later. Actually, I was barely able to walk. I actually couldn't walk at first. And it was a mistake. It was very difficult. The students had to help me through it. And after 2 years, I took a break, and I'm only returning now, really.
And how does that feel?
Break.
To return now?
It feels good, but I love it. I'm working with adults mostly now, returning adults, but I don't have as much energy for it. And it takes a lot out of me, but it's so rewarding. It's great work.
To learn more about Sebastian Matthews and his newest book, Beyond Repair, Living in a Fractured State, please visit SebastianMatthews.com. On Facebook, Sebastian Matthews Writer. And the hashtag he's using is Sebastian_Matthews_writer. Here comes the break. We'll be right back, and that is a promise.
Who says money can't buy happiness? Whether you are a skeptic or seeker, check out Lisa's new book. Are we happy yet? 8 Keys to Unlocking a Joyful Life. A boot camp manual for greater emotional fitness is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound, and HarvestingHappiness.com. Here's a truth bomb. Emotions are contagious, and happiness is a universally desired state. But we tend to forget that we all have the freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable each day, regardless of external circumstances. Explore the journey of human happiness, how to find it and keep it, with Lisa's documentary film, H Factor. Where is your heart? Visit harvestinghappiness.com to learn more.
And we're back, continuing the conversation with my guest, Sebastian Matthews. We're talking about what it takes to rise up, reaching for resilience in challenging times. Let's get back to it. Sebastian, in the last segment, you talked about the circumstances that occurred after the accident and the recovery and healing process. And I'm wondering how your journey has affected you as a father, affected your parenting of a teenage son in a very unsettled world.
It's a great question, and I'm in the middle of trying to figure it out. He's a senior in high school now. He was 8 when the accident occurred, and he's kind of growing into his teens in the span of the book. He is a very sharp kid and got a sharp wit, and he really doesn't let anything go that he notices that he thinks maybe is a little off or a little fake. And I think that propensity of his was really helpful because he kind of called me on a lot of stuff. I was trying hard to the parent, maybe trying to overparent in a way, and he was really letting me know that he saw that I was struggling and that he could handle it and kind of back up a little bit. So there was one kind of a sense of both my wife and I of kind of learning from him in some ways as much as learning, trying to teach him. It was when you have a willful boy who's growing into his teens, you got to give a little bit, and you got to give him a little room, but you got to be able to be there and hold him, hold place for him, hold space. And that was hard to do sometimes, again, being wrapped up in pain or being wrapped up in your own saga. It was a struggle. And so I think, that was the challenge. And in some ways I was lucky and very privileged to take a break from teaching and be more of a stay-at-home dad because I could be a little more present in those down periods with him.
Were your son and your wife in the car with you?
Yeah, I was driving. My wife was next to me, and our son was in the back. He was relatively unharmed physically. We all had seatbelts, but he was 8. He was in a chair. He wasn't in a chair, but he just didn't get hurt, and he had to deal more with the psychological ramifications. With us being away for a couple months, then coming home in wheelchairs and not having the energy to play with them, and one of the things that was in the first book is we invented a game. We had an old trampoline, and he began to lure me out in the wheelchair, and he would be on the trampoline, and I would get the ball and I'd throw it over the net, and he would throw it back. And when I finally got out of the wheelchair, we did it, and then he started making me kind of take a step to my left, and I started trying to get him to. My goal was to get it onto the trampoline without him catching it. And basically, by the end, it was like an Olympic game. I had one bounce on the ground. We had a field. We had rules, we had, it was vicious. It was so
great.
Fun. And in a way, he kind of showed me how I could be a parent in that play way, that way to be, because he's very physical, very active. So we had some great, we learned some lessons together.
What did your injury and the recovery process teach you about recovering and repairing our fractured nation?
I think, I'm 55. I'm a white guy. I've got a lot of privilege. I can move through this world. I think people are understanding this more and more pretty easily. If I wanted to, I could stay away from certain things. I can live in a bubble. I can stay out of a certain discourse if I wanted to. I'd be fine. And I realized that I can't do that. I need to be in the conversation as a writer. I need to participate as a citizen, give my time if I can, give money if I can, be there for my family and friends, but also for the community and the communities that I'm in. It really got me activated to pay more attention and to recognize that life is really it is a blessing, and it's lucky. I'm lucky to be alive, and so I use it as a bit of as a catalyst to do more and not just so much like super buddy do more, but maybe even better said, pay more attention.
Do you think it helped you cultivate some altruism? Or were you feeling altruistic before? Was that in your character?
It is. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it wasn't to some degree. Certainly as a teacher and, did some big brother, big sister mentoring. And it's not always a natural fit for me, but it's the inclination, the urge is there. Certainly, I think what this did was showed me, and I also saw examples of it. I thought working with the PT people and the therapists and the EMTs at that first crash site, very impressed by all those people. They were incredibly, and the nurses, giving and strong and clear. And I thought, okay, that's not my path, but I can learn from these people. So maybe more so, maybe a little more so.
And finally, there's an interesting point you bring up in the book, Beyond Repair, Living in a Fractured State, about the woman that you're married to, your wife. And I would love for you to tell a little bit about her and your community and your observations culturally.
Definitely. Well, the funny thing is that she was a big character in the first book, and she said, "Would you please keep me out of the second one?" And so I did that as much as I could, but I had to, I wanted people to understand that we're a couple and I'm not parenting my son alone. I needed to give enough context so that they knew, but I tried to keep her out of it. But she's Jewish. I grew up as an atheist and had no religion. So for me, letting and participating in having our son grow up in a Jewish household was interesting, exciting, and I was up for it. And so, bringing him to bar mitzvah, being part of a community. There is actually a vibrant community of Jewish community in Asheville. But, Avery's best friend, he's adopted, and his best friend is adopted, born in Jamaica, and his friend Phoenix. And so he's living in a real white world, but as a Jewish kid with a black friend, when the Orlando shooting happened, when all these things were happening, wondering about the police, wondering about, racial stereotyping, I had to kind of talk to him about, listen, being a Jewish boy, there's some things that you may not understand that could come your way, that you need to be aware of, and you need to be aware of it in terms of your friend, and you guys have to be, proud of yourselves, but also careful. And so it culturally, being married to Allie and being part of her family and of joining a synagogue and being a parent of a bar mitzvah boy, it's just, it's just deep in my life, and just all the cultural stuff. We're not the most, we don't practice very much. And, we'll light a candle on, Shabbat, but just the idea that, it's deep in my life, and it's made our marriage kind of warmer, and it's connected me to her family in ways that I wouldn't have been connected to otherwise. And it's been a real, a gift. I just had a friend from grad school who introduced me to his friends. He's kind of a Jew, he said. And
kind of a Jew.
Yeah. Well, I bet you didn't expect to end up where you ended up. And it was very warm and funny. And I just laughed. And, for me, when her father said I was an honorary Jew, it was one of the best things I'd ever heard.
Oh, and I think maybe that's part of the journey of the book, Beyond Repair, Living in a Fractured State, is the unexpected places that you ended up as a result of a horrible happening.
Yes, definitely. And also, I think the challenge of the book, it's not a prescriptive book. I basically just show these encounters and try to bring you on a journey. But if there's a challenge to the reader, it is, you'll find if you open yourself up to people and try to be in a safe way and in a boundaried way, generous with other people and yourself, you will go other places, new places as well. And we need it badly right now.
We do. I mean, the book is a testimony to hope and healing and possibility and rebirth in its own way. And I'm so glad that you're able to share it with our audience, and that the ability to write and grow from your experience is touching so many people's lives. I think that's a gift unto itself.
Oh. Yeah, well, it is for me too, and you hope the book gets out there, but really, what you I think I've learned is that you hope for the book to be part of a bigger conversation, or to be, as an author here on this show, being in conversation. Hopefully, people listening get a sense of it. They want to read the book, or they want to do something, that is, from hearing us talk. It's the exciting part, and it's interesting to be doing it in the pandemic with so much Zoom and so much phone, but it has has some surprises and pleasant aspects. I was worried about it at first, but it's kind of fun.
I think that what this whole period of time has made me see, and having conversations with people like you, is that, we can be alone, we can be separated, but we're not really alone. And you sharing this only, for me, makes that more concrete, that recovery process in many respects is very, very solitary. None of us gets through it alone, but yet the journey is kind of solitary.
Oh, I think so. If we have time, I'll tell you two really quick anecdotes. One, probably a year after I'd really gotten back to my, full gait, my full walking, I could, people didn't even know I'd been in an accident. I walked, as part of my day. So I'm walking through the neighborhood, and this man was walking down the street, a young man, so tentatively, in such a way that I knew what happened to him. And I said to him, "So how long ago did you break your feet?" And he looked at me and he almost started crying. And he said, "How did you know?" Because I said, "I broke both my feet. And that's how I walked." And I said, "That was 2 years ago. And look what I'm doing. So good luck. You can do it."
Yeah.
And it was a moving experience. And the other one is, recently a neighbor of mine has gone through some brain cancer, and I got an email from her. I hadn't been in touch with her for a long time, but she was one of the folks that had walked my dog, another dog. And she said, "Could you walk my dog when I'm away?" And I'm like, "You bet." So there's another example of kind of, you do it alone, but you are within communities. And the virtual community is, I found, a real one.
It is. And, alone but never alone kind of thing. And a testimony to the human spirit of resilience. And I thank you. I thank you for sharing your book and your story. To learn more about Sebastian Matthews and his work, please visit SebastianMatthews.com. On Facebook, Sebastian Matthews Writer. And the hashtag being used is Sebastian_Matthews_writer. Sebastian, thanks for hanging out with me.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen and my guests Scott Hamilton and Sebastian Matthews, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Go out and rock your day.
Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere, from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes via our free app or from our libraries at toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, and other fine podcast platforms. To learn more about Lisa's global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU Radio Malibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.